Hi gang, well, the whole of the Horus Heresy seems to be infected with scrap code at the moment, and this isn't just limited to the forces of the Forge World. The armies of the Questoris Knights are just as susceptible. So let's look into the rules for traitor houses and see how our knights can fall just as easily as their tech priest carers. If you'd like to support the channel, you can like and subscribe or stay tuned at the end for details of merch and affiliate links. So the Questoris Knights have been stomping around the battlefields of the Horus Heresy for a while now, but the Martian Civil War book gives us a new way of running them. Rules for knight houses that have fallen to the corruption of the dark powers. Now, this is very much an optional set of rules. Your traitor knights might just have sided with Horus without being totally chaosed up, in which case you just use the basic list. But if you want to represent a knight house that's a bit spookier than most, well, now you can. Usually in these videos, I go through every unit available to the army and explain what it does and where to get it. But that's already covered here in the video on the Questoris Knights. The basic army list, units and detachment types are all the same. So if you haven't watched that video, I'd recommend you do so first. But if you are familiar with regular knights, then it's time to introduce some scrap code to the mix and see what staggers out. Knight houses fought on both sides of the Horus Heresy. During the Great Crusade, the ancient knight worlds have been rediscovered by the expeditionary fleets of the Imperium, and generally were either incorporated into its ranks as independent worlds, or, if the Mechanicum got there first, might have been pledged to the service of a nearby Forge world in return for technical secrets. When the Horus Heresy broke out, the forces of the Questoris houses were attached to Crusade fleets on both sides and often sided with their compatriots, with lances of Questoris Knights fighting for both the War Master and the Emperor. But in the wake of the heresy, knight houses on the side of the traitors were exposed to the power of the warp. With the opening of the Vaults of Moravec on Mars, the section of the Mechanicum that sided with Horus started researching into the forbidden technologies of the warp, creating twisted fusions of demon and machine, and through dark pacts and invasive scrap code, the powers of the warp spread through their allied knight houses. And even independent Questoris forces could be lured to the side of chaos through their own pride, famously starting with the fallen House Divine on the world of Molech. But don't worry, now you can fall to the dark powers of chaos too. The way this works is through a system called Dark Blessings that count as upgrades for the knights in the regular Divisio Tacticus Questoris Knight list in Liber Mechanicum. So if you don't know how that works, you can find the link to that below. Dark Blessings are available to traitor players only. These are an alternative to the household ranks that regular Questoris lists can use. As soon as you take one Dark Blessing on your knights, the entire army loses access to household ranks, so they're very much a complete alternative. One interesting difference here is that household ranks are usually only available to models within the Questoris household detachment, but Dark Blessings can be taken by a single knight that you put in your army as a Lord of War choice. So you can take just one corrupted knight if you really want. There are 9 blessings to choose from here. Broadly, they're themed around the sort of marks of chaos idea we see in the regular demons list. First, your Warlord Knight in a Questoris detachment must take Conqueror of Worlds, which is the most expensive upgrade at 80 points. This gives them +1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, and just like its loyal equivalent, Seneschal, it allows knights within 8 inches to react to things that are smaller than them. You can't give this to any of the Acasta-sized huge models. It also makes this model a character, which basically means they can issue challenges to other big things like knights. So that's the basic one you start with, that's your leader. Then we enter the realm of Marks of Chaos. Heedless Slaughter is the corn option, representing knights that are lost to bloodlust, but it is one of the more interesting ones here. Heedless Slaughter is free, and it turns the model into a character, but the knight that gets it loses 1 from its weapon skill and ballistic skill. The trade-off is, for each big knight you give this upgrade to, you can pick a unit of armigers and give them Rage 2. I don't know if that's a bad one, or it kind of just depends what weapons you're giving that knight. Malevolent Artifice then means that the knight has been given the blessings of the Dark Mechanicum. At the end of each turn, if the knight has inflicted any damage on an enemy that turn, they get It Will Not Die 6 up, and every other turn after that, if they do the same, that It Will Not Die will get 1 better to a maximum of 4 up. Personally, I quite like the idea of that on just all the knights. Encroaching Ruin is then the general chaos option. This works a bit like a lower ranked leader. The knight gets +1 ballistic skill and weapon skill and becomes a character just like the leader, and then its special ability is that armigers starting their turn within 6 inches of it will get +2 to their movement. Into the more obvious god themed ones, Putrid Corruption is of course the Nurgle one, and for 45 points, the model reduces their movement by 2, but if they ever suffer an explodes result, which would usually on a knight deal d3 whole points of damage, you always count as rolling 1 on the dice. Infernal Tempest is the Tzeentchi magic one. For 25 points, it turns the knight into a sort of apprentice wizard with a leadership of 7. The knight has a couple of psychic powers here. It can attempt to increase its invulnerable save by 1, and it can also summon an Imperial Tempest, a strength 5 AP2 3-inch blast weapon with guided fire. Both of those have a risk of Perils of the Warp happening. The knight is a psyker, but it is only leadership 7, so it's not a very good one. Ravenous Dissolution turns the knight into an obsessive hunter, gaining +1 weapon skill and the character rule, no +1 ballistic skill this time. You then pick an enemy unit that is marked for death, and any model with this upgrade will get to reroll wound rolls of 1 against it. That actually seems quite minimal for 50 points, but it might be useful, especially if your opponent is fielding their own big things like knights. Rapturous Sensation is then the Slaanesh option. This one makes your knight so pretty that any enemy unit within 8 has to take a leadership check before they're allowed to use a reaction. If they fail, they can't use any more reactions that turn. As you can imagine, that's quite an expensive one, that's 65 points. And finally, Formless Distortion, which is the other sort of Tzeentch one, again increases the weapon skill by 1 and gives the knight character, but it also replaces their melee weapon with an Ionic Lash, the standard Strength 10 AP2 knight weapon, but this one has Exoshock 6 up and Reach 2. So this is basically a way of making use of the big lashy thing you get in some of the evil knight kits, which is handy. And that's it. If you want to dedicate your knights to the service of the dark gods, that's how you do it. Bear in mind that while these are only available to traitors, so are the regular household ranks. If you don't want to use any of this, you can just take a traitor knight house with all the usual rules and ignore all this. This is just an alternate way of fielding them. I quite like all these rules. I'm not sure they're actually better than the normal household rules. Some of them are quite powerful, but a lot of them are also very expensive. But they do add a lot of theme and allow you to field a knight army that feels very different to the normal sort of knights. Sometimes that thematic element can be a bit unwieldy though. I'm not a big fan of how they've stuck with the same 8 names for the 8 chaos marks, you know, Heedless Slaughter, Encroaching Ruin. That's very atmospheric, but it's annoying that they then do completely different things every time they're introduced in an army list. The Ruinstorm Demons list and Demon Engines all use the same names but have different rules, which is a little confusing. However, overall, yeah, I think this is a nice simple addition. There's not loads of new rules, it doesn't add much more, it just swaps one system out for another. It's just a few pages of optional stuff, and you get to field something that feels really thematic and different. I'll certainly be using these rules to represent my old Forge World Chaos Knights. They look way too spiky to be regular household ranks anyway. We'll just say they fell really early. Thanks for watching. If you'd like more videos, there'll be one popping up in just a second to the right there. In the meantime, if you'd like to support the channel, you can always like and subscribe, or if you want to see our affiliate links, they're all listed in the thing below. And finally, if you'd like some merch, well, there's some options being shown to you just under this video, but the full selection is available on the website. See ya!